All right, thank you all very much for coming along to this workshop today. This workshop is all about youth volunteering, and it's about who young volunteers are, what the challenges are with specifically youth volunteering, and hopefully some of the solutions to those challenges and what's ahead in the future. So I don't want this to be too formal. I want it to be the sort of thing that's like a Q&A session, but not just me providing questions to our panelists, but anyone from the audience at any point is welcome to ask a question as well. So if you just want to raise your hand if you'd like to ask something, and we'll pass the microphone to you. Without further ado, we'll get started. Just to provide a little bit of background about why this is a workshop, it can be easy to think of youth volunteering as a niche area, as just another service area for Red Cross, or as a specialty area that perhaps not all of you are involved in or perhaps interested in. Hopefully you are. But I would argue that it's actually crucial for everyone in all organisations like Red Cross to be aware of the issues surrounding youth volunteering. And the reason for that is, it sounds like a bit of a cliche, but youth really are the future of organisations, and I'm not saying that in a sort of a fluffy, cliched sort of way. It's actually crucial for the future of many organisations to involve young people, otherwise they will not survive, and Red Cross is included in that. If you look at some of the statistics surrounding this, for instance, there was a report put out by the International Federation of Red Cross and Red Crescent looking at global volunteering trends within the movement. As you all may know, the Federation collectively is the largest humanitarian movement in the world, with somewhere between 13 to 17 million volunteers across the planet, which is incredible. But what they found when they looked into this was that globally the number of volunteers is either static or it's falling. And that is despite the fact that we have a rapidly growing population, and despite the fact that now the majority of the world's population are young people. So I'll just leave you to think about that. That is why we're here today. That is why we need to think about how we engage young people in volunteering, and try to talk about some of the solutions that we may need to challenge ourselves with in order to stop the decline of organisations like the Federation, but all sorts of other organisations across the world that work in similar spaces to us. So I'd like to welcome our four remarkable panellists. We're really lucky to have the four people we have here today. First of all, I'd like to introduce Linh. There you are. So Linh is the co-founder of oursay.org and a founder of Change a Million Light Bulbs, and I may get her to just talk a little bit about what that is. But basically, Linh is a social change advocate and has been working on environmental issues for the past 6 years. She has a background in community organising, campaigning, journalism and strategy development. Linh has worked with a wide array of individuals, from high school students to UNEP and the Reuters Foundation. She is a co-founder of oursay, recreationally the editor of The Verb, and sits on the board of the Centre for Sustainability Leadership. She's also currently the community coordinator at Australian Conservation Foundation, and in 2013 she was named a World Economic Forum Global Shaper, the Australian Geographic Young Conservationist of the Year, and one of the Junior Chamber International Outstanding Young Persons of the World. So she's a very distinguished person at a very young age, so please welcome Linh. Okay. Next we have Lara Bean to my left. Lara is a member of the Tasmanian Youth Advisory Committee of Australian Red Cross. So Lara has just finished Year 12, yay! And she first became involved with Australian Red Cross after linking up with a Red Cross employee at one of the organisation's Good Start breakfast program venues. Since then, she's participated in community events, training events, and has even had the opportunity to travel to Timor-Leste for a week to represent Australian Red Cross. We actually both attended that camp, and it was a really amazing camp, and it was really great to have Lara there along with me. She's also a really amazing person at a very young age, so please welcome Lara. I'd now like to introduce Lara Aldobasic. Have I said that right? Okay, so Lara is from Australian Indigenous Mentoring Experience, or AIM, which I'm sure many of you have heard of. Lara is a 21-year-old Gunditjmara Mara descendant who is passionate about international human rights, including that of her own people. She was the first to break the mould of her family and complete high school and go on to complete a degree earlier this year. She stepped up and out in her community volunteering with a number of different organisations, including Dandenong Youth Group, Slam Ministry, which is a prison basketball ministry, as well as camp for kids whose parents are in prison, YMCA youth camps, Indigenous Ministries Australia, and Victorian Youth Parliament, whilst recently also being elected at the Victorian Youth Governor, as well as working away at AIM. She started on the program as a mentee, and she's now become the program manager of AIM at RMIT, working with the Dynamic Education Indigenous Mentoring Program that offers Indigenous young people the opportunity to be guided to reach their potential. So if you could please also welcome Lara. And finally, we have Sean Hanley. It says up there, Patrick, who unfortunately was unable to make it, but in his place we have someone that Patrick has told me is even better than himself. So Sean Hanley is the Chief Financial Officer of YGAP, or Youth Generation Against Poverty, which is another very well-known youth volunteering organisation. So Sean is a qualified chartered accountant with over 10 years' experience across the public and private sectors in both traditional and development accounting. Sean began volunteering for YGAP in 2010 on the Rwandan project before returning to develop and lead the 5 Cent campaign, and has been the Chief Financial Officer of the organisation for the last 3 years. Currently, he's working in the Assurance Division of Ernst & Young, having previously worked at the Bureau of Meteorology, Department of Defence, and in private practice in Canberra and Sydney. He holds a Bachelor of Commerce in Accounting from the Australian National University. Please welcome Sean. Okay, before we launch into some of the questions, what I'd like to do, now that we've heard their official bios and some of the details about their volunteering experience, I'd now like to ask each of our panellists why they started volunteering. What was it that made them join their first volunteer experience? Because I think that reveals even more about themselves and more about what we're talking about here than their list of very impressive accomplishments. So perhaps I'll turn it over to Lara to begin.
Is that on? Yep, cool. Hello? Hello? Thank you. Hello? Yeah? Good. Okay, glad we got that one sorted. Before I do start, I would formally like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land that we get to meet on today, and that we get to kind of hold this event on, because I know that's really important for me and for obviously the descendants of those from this community. So I'd like to pay my respects to elders past and present, Indigenous people in this room, and also non-Indigenous people who sit here. Why I first started volunteering. So my boss actually put that bio together because I really struggle trying to express what I've done since I finished high school. So I guess when I first started, I was from Dandenong. Some of you guys might know where that is, but it's a low socioeconomic area, maybe an hour away from the city. And I kind of never used to come into the city for quite some time because I was obviously not trapped in Dandenong, but just solidated in that area. And when I was kind of living in that community, all the stereotypes that you hear about that place, I was living in and amongst. So from criminal justice system to alcohol abuse to all of that kind of stuff, I was involved in that in some way, shape or form. And so growing up, I kind of didn't have anywhere to turn to, and went along to a local youth group called Dandenong Youth Group. And some of you might know it, some of you might not, but I think for me it's kind of what kept me in Dandenong, kept me kind of stopping myself doing the stuff that obviously my family was involved in. And that happened every Friday night. And them showing me the love and the care that I needed every Friday night, a space away from home and a chance just to kind of rebuild and reconnect with people who are like-minded to myself. I knew that I too wanted to do that. And why is because a lot of the time, young people can help other young people. And sometimes it's awesome to have an older person tell us what to do and stuff like that, but sometimes it gets too committed to being that up there figure and that pedestal figure, whereas if it's a young person, they're down on the ground and they're connected to you, and they know exactly how you feel, or they've been through it before. And so for me, it was just that. I knew exactly what they were feeling. I knew exactly how they were going through, what they were going through, and how they were connected to the community and what we could do better. And why was because my youth leader gave us a space to step up, and I just took the opportunity.
Linh, do you want to tell us your story?
Hello. Okay.
Maybe hold it a bit closer.
Closer? I think that's just my... Oh, no. Sorry. There you go. I don't know. Hi. Thank you very much for having me. Apologies that my bio, that I think I might actually have prepared many years ago, is full of a lot of pomp, unfortunately, because I think for me that's completely the opposite of what volunteering is about. Volunteering for me is both, I guess, a very humbling experience, but also a deeply personal one. How I got into volunteering, I think, goes back to one of the things that I value the most is community and people. For me, volunteering was never really a thing that I had a choice in doing necessarily. It was just sort of the way that I was raised. My parents were really big on always giving back to the local community, wherever that happened to be. So I grew up in Footscray, which is to Melbourne's west. That way. Sorry. That way. And something that we always did as a family activity, as opposed to going to shopping malls or going on holidays overseas and things like that, was actually giving back to our community. So sometimes that was volunteering at the soup kitchen. Sometimes that was just taking meals out to people who happened to be elderly and couldn't do that themselves. And it was always about connecting to other people, and it was always about what could you be doing to make someone else's life better. You might not necessarily know that person might not necessarily know you, you might never encounter them again, but how can you make a small little difference in their life? And I think that was what first brought me to volunteering in general, was the way that my parents chose to raise my younger brother and I up, which was great, because I think by the time I was in high school, we started to have subjects that were all about civics and how we could be contributing back to our community. And for me, that was really easy because I'd grown up doing it. And my first actually formal instance of volunteering with an actual organisation that extended into a community that wasn't at the time my own community, was actually with the Red Cross itself, when I was on the Youth Advisory Council as well, I think I was in year 12 at the same time that I had joined as well. And it was that funny thing of suddenly I was volunteering and trying to help communities that I had never met, that potentially I would never meet as well. So for me, volunteering very much came from a place of who do I immediately know, who can I immediately help, to a much bigger problem of actually we face so many global issues today. We're obviously not dealing with all of them very well, and how is it that I as an individual can be contributing beyond what my day-to-day job is, or beyond what my academic studies said that I had to do as well.
Thank you. Sean?
See how I go. Hello? Yeah. First time. So I actually came to volunteering in contrast quite late in the game. I don't know, just been doing other stuff, playing sports and doing, I guess, whatever else with my life. And I got to a point, and I guess, well into sort of my early 20s, I was usually doing some sort of study, whether it be part-time or full-time, and I was having one or two jobs at the time. And I finally got to the end of that sort of third or fourth, study aspect, like I'm doing CA and masters and stuff like that. And I was like, I got a little bit of capacity. And I guess what I found was that, and I think this is fundamental to really a lot of the volunteers that we have at YGAP, is that my job that I have day to day isn't giving me everything I want. And I'm not going to find a perfect job. Like, even if I worked at sort of Google or whatever, that job's not going to give me everything I want. And so I need to supplement it with something. And for me, by chance, I was watching a TED talk around the time that I was thinking about this stuff. And then I ended up having a conversation with Elliot, who's our CEO. And we tried to work out a way for me to sort of get involved in the organisation. And then, unfortunately, I drank the Kool-Aid and now I'm stuck there.
Awesome. Thanks. Lara?
Hello? Okay, it's working. I'm sorry, everyone. I have to apologise first. I'm very nervous, so if I stutter, please forgive me. Thanks, Mitch, for having me up here. It means a lot to me as well. So I first became involved in volunteering. I was part of the Good Start Breakfast Club in Launceston, and I met a Red Cross member there who directed me in the direction of TASYAC. It was just sort of establishing itself, and they were trying to recruit. I first became interested in volunteering. I grew up in the northwest coast of Tasmania. It's not extremely isolated, but it can be very isolating if you don't have the same interests as other people. There was a lot of teenagers my age who were into alcohol abuse, drugs, things like that, and I just knew that that's not what I was interested in. I wanted something more out of, I guess, life. I wanted to feel the satisfaction of helping others and giving back to my community, and especially to a community that didn't really have that much to offer. So I moved to Launceston to sort of brand new start to finish college, and I mean obviously in Portsrell or Devonport where I grew up, the only Red Cross there was the blood service, so there was not really any opportunities to volunteer anyway, and generally there isn't much of a presence of any other charities. You get your op shops and things like that, but there wasn't that organisation that you can join and be a part of a movement. So when I moved to Launceston, I became involved in that, and I just knew from the moment that I started in Red Cross that this was something I wanted to do and that I wanted to be a part of something for a long time to come. And I guess it just sparked a passion in me that, you know, it's never going to go away. I'm always going to be passionate about volunteering and wanting to put my hand up for things to better other people. And also as well, that it is a bit of like self-satisfaction when you get to see someone else enjoy their life more because of what you've done for them. And I think generally it's a personality builder. It makes you an all-rounded, well citizen to give back to your community instead of sitting at home playing video games or going out drinking with your friends. So, yeah.
Great, thank you. Just by way of contrast, we'll see if this works. Is there anyone in the audience over the age of, say, 50 who was some sort of volunteer when they were young? Oh, great, we have lots. Perhaps that gentleman sitting there. If it's okay with you, I'd just like to ask you your reasons for volunteering. Perhaps you can tell us a bit about your volunteering experience and tell us why you started volunteering, see if there's any contrast to what's been said.
I started volunteering when I was about 18. It started off with a rural youth group in a small country town in New South Wales in the Central West. And yeah, from that, I've always been involved in community projects and that sort of thing. So nowadays, as I've got older, I've graduated up on the New South Wales Advisory Board, and which is, I've been a Red Cross branch member for about 14 years after being pushed by my wife to get into it when I was retired, and because I had to retire early for health reasons, and therefore I got involved with Red Cross. I've been involved with other service clubs, Rotary, then in Lions now, and yeah, I've been fortunate in life, and if I can give something back to the people in the community, like Lara was just saying, it's great.
Thank you very much. Okay, now we'll proceed into the main part of the discussion surrounding some of the topics we'll cover today. I'd just like to, before we go into that, just say that I would encourage all of our panelists and everyone contributing today to be honest. It seems like a simple thing to say, but I think sometimes, particularly in this sort of space, people can be quite polite, and because we're all so committed to making this work, we can sometimes have a tendency to paper over the cracks, as it were, to sometimes not really acknowledge some of the issues and problems that do exist in this space. So I would encourage everyone, if you feel it's necessary, to be constructively critical. Those of you who know me know that I am not afraid to do that in my own work as the chairman of the Victorian Youth Advisory Committee of Australian Red Cross, and I would encourage you all to do the same. I wish I could guarantee you anonymity, but there's a massive camera down the back. But nonetheless, I think honesty will contribute a lot to this discussion. Okay, so the first part, which we've kind of already started on, is who are young volunteers? I'm interested to know, is there a typical young volunteer? Like, is there one sort of person who just is a volunteer, or that volunteers tend to come from, or is there more diversity than that? I'd like to start with Sean. You work for a very well-established and highly professional organisation that is very prominent, and I'd like to hear your opinion on that. Do you find that you draw your volunteers from one type of person, one type of demographic, or is it really diverse?
Yeah, I think that we are really happy to have been able to, I guess, and I guess I'm symptomatic of this, is the one thing that YGAP really tries to do is provide access to social justice issues for people that otherwise wouldn't be involved in them. So I guess you have your sort of international relations and art students that obviously often get involved in these sort of things, but then the idea is we're trying to really get involved, you know, you people like your labourers or your graphic designers or your accountants, and trying to engage them in an issue and try and help them. I guess in terms of YGAP, and I think more broadly in terms of who are young volunteers, I really think it depends about what your organisation is. Like if you're an oak tree, then you're getting a lot of your university sort of students, whereas YGAP really hits that market of sort of maybe 22 to 35. And then I'd say, you know, your World Vision hits a lot of school kids. We're trying to take some of those school kids with the 5 cent campaign, but we'll see how we go. So I think, does that answer the question a bit?
Yeah. Does someone else want to add something to that? Lara, what do you think?
I just think like volunteers are like young volunteers especially are a group of like-minded sort of tweens, teens and young adults coming together to share you know, ideas that they have and they want to put forward in a group that's in an environment that's supportive. And I guess I agree with Sean, it's dependent on what organisation you go to and what age group you target, how you classify who are young volunteers. But I just think, I guess most volunteers have at heart, really they want to come forward, put their ideas forward and be heard in a world that is ruled a lot by leaders that are obviously a lot older than us and have a lot more power and you know, a lot more professional. When some of us, I mean I don't have a degree in anything. I've just finished year 12 and it's hard to get your voice out when you're at that age. It's like you're insignificant. So I guess volunteers, it's one of those things where you can come together and you know that you're surrounded by your age groups and you know, and it's supportive. I guess it's that group of it's just you're coming together. It's a group of people coming together, I guess. Yeah.
Are there many other people your age who are interested in volunteering in your experience?
Where I live, no. Not at all. I mean, there are those select few that put their hand up for a lot of things. But I mean, I've tried to run programs at my high school and my college, and a lot of them do go ahead. But it's hard. I mean, when you're defining volunteering, it's whether you're putting money forward or you're actually giving up your time. A lot of people are willing to sign a petition and put a bit of money forward, but not a lot of people are willing to give up their time. And that's something that I value as a volunteer, is that if you're going to volunteer for something, you need to give up some of your time. I mean, it is hard. I mean, we're all busy, but you know, it's hard to find those people in my age bracket and that want to come forward and give up their Saturday mornings to help other people. And it's hard, but I mean, it's different wherever you go, I think.
What about you, Nada?
I guess, so when I speak for AIM, I'll definitely speak for Victoria because I know that AIM's a national organisation and it's different in every state and territory. But I guess when I look at kind of who are young volunteers and who are those young ones volunteering for, and I guess I look at the head of the organisation and then I look how it kind of trickles down. And I know for me, I'm only 21 and I'm a program manager working with 150 young people, 150 volunteers, and coordinating and facilitating schools and that kind of stuff. And so for other young people, that's attractive. And for other university students, that's attractive because there's a young person running it. And so I want to be a part of that because they might think similar to me. So I work with a lot of university students and I get a lot of social work students, but then it kind of moves. So I guess working in that space, I get students who are really committed and really wanting to volunteer. And then I guess it's been a really interesting kind of experiment for myself, coming from Dandenong, working and studying my degree at RMIT in criminal justice, and seeing a different space. And we started asking volunteers to come from Ormond College. So some of you might know Ormond College, but it's a prestigious college at Melbourne University. And when I'm working with Ormond College students, it's way different to when I'm working with RMIT students who, I guess, really strive. RMIT students really want to be there. They're committed. They're telling me they're going to give their time up. Whereas Ormond College students, it's a different culture. Like, they're coming from a culture that's embedded in that college. It's a space where they can go and be together. And I guess it just depends on the culture that they come from and the culture that they want to perceive, as well as the person kind of initially running it. Not saying that those older aren't as attractive as the young ones, but just saying, I guess, the young ones kind of really draw near to those younger because they're very like-minded. But then again, I learn every day from my elders, so I can't say that.
Just to come back to you quickly, Sean, you mentioned that YGAP has tried to branch out, I guess, from the more traditional group of young volunteers, which is university students, to labourers, etc. Speaking honestly, what has your success been like with that?
Well, I'd say most of our organisation is that. So our volunteer base is that group of 22 to 35. Weirdly enough, we're not really sure exactly. We didn't plan to do it that way, but I guess the organisation started with a group of people about that age, and I think a lot of building on your volunteer base is about connection. And so I guess a personal connection that you have with someone, and I think the youth thing's a massive thing as well, in terms of if I'm sort of leading a meeting or something at YGAP, I think it's easier for sort of a 25-year-old or something to connect with me than if I was a 50-year-old doing the sort of same conversation. And so I think that's why we're able to sort of keep that group connected. And I guess we try to really leverage off their skills and give them opportunities to sort of do things that they wouldn't be able to do in their actual job. So like, I'm a perfect example. I'm actually pretty decent at accounting, like, I'm all right. But I'm not going to be a CFO of a Myer or something like that, but I could be a CFO of YGAP. And so it's an opportunity to really stretch yourself, and sort of that idea of sort of autonomy and mastery and purpose all in one, which I think is really crucial to volunteering.
Can everyone see Sean? I feel like he's kind of cut off there. Maybe if we try and
Behind the
shift
curtain, it's fine.
I don't want to push you off the stage now either. I now want to ask perhaps a bit of a controversial question, but it is something that does come up in discussions with young volunteers, just with that theme of trying to move away from that traditional base of young volunteers being generally middle-class university students. Is there any reason why people not from that group would be a different sort of volunteer if they were to become involved in volunteering? Would they be basically any better or worse? The reason I ask this question is that sometimes, speaking to some people, they're of the opinion that to be involved in something like volunteering and to do some of the amazing things that you do, that you need to be from a university background. You need to have those organisational skills and academic skills that come from being that middle-class university background in order to be a successful volunteer. That's obviously a very controversial point, and I just wanted to hear what some of you and perhaps what some of the people in the audience think about that. So, Linh, do you want to?
That's a really interesting question. So I just finished up at the Australian Conservation Foundation, so we're Australia's leading environment organisation, and one of the things that I did there was run our volunteer program, which is quite different to just some of the experiences that have been shared here, in that that's an organisation. We have millions of dollars in revenue every year. We fundraise. So to have a volunteering program there was quite different. And one of the things that I often got to do with our volunteers was, for one, our volunteers ranged in age from 8 all the way to 80. And one of the really interesting things from what you were saying before, Lara, was the moment you choose to come volunteer for an organisation like the Australian Conservation Foundation, in part because of the culture that we set, it didn't matter if you were 76 and you were the former justice in the High Court of Australia, or you were someone that was just finishing year 12, you were there to volunteer. So it was a really humbling experience because everyone came and everyone was on the same ground. But one of the things that we did start to notice is, I guess our membership base is quite white, is quite middle class, is quite privileged, and understands the benefits of volunteering. So one of the things that I think becomes really important, especially for organisations that are established enough to recognise how privileged they are, their role and place in society, is to address the lack of diversity that they have in their membership base, the lack of the diversity that they have in their volunteer programs. And that was something that we worked really hard to do. Even though volunteers come, they give up their time, it doesn't mean that we can't make that process as easy as possible for them. So we did really small, simple things that I think went quite a long way for certain people that were coming to volunteer. So this was everything from reimbursing people for public transport tickets so that they weren't out of pocket, so that they could come and give up 8 hours of their day to help us out. We did a communal lunch when volunteers were in the office, which was another thing that was really nice. And just to go back to the question before, even though we had volunteers from 8 to the age of 80, what I noticed a lot with young people that wanted to volunteer with us, and when I say young, I mean probably anyone under the age of 35, who people were at that point where suddenly volunteering wasn't enough of a supplement anymore. Suddenly they did want to move into a job that gave them that mastery, that impact, something that had a lot of purpose as well. And breaking into the non-profit sector is particularly hard. To find full-time employment for an issue that you care about, to be able to actually utilize your skills and have a sense of purpose, is ridiculously difficult. And we would constantly have young people volunteering so that they could have experience. So suddenly they could apply for that job that required 5 years of experience. And one of the things that we were successful at doing at ACF was establishing up a graduate program. So we're one of the few non-profits in Australia that has a graduate program that targets university students, people that have recently graduated from high school as well, actually, to be able to bridge that gap and to be able to say, it doesn't matter if you don't have the years of experience or you haven't come from this privileged background. So I think the responsibility is for organisations like ACF, Red Cross, to break down a lot of those systems of oppression that already exist.
That sounds like a really interesting initiative. I'd like to open this question up to the audience in particular, not just to the young people in the room, but to anyone. Does anyone have a response to that question as to whether, say, let's say, a person who works in the trades, or even someone that that hasn't undertaken any sort of formal training or qualification, is there any reason why they would be a better or worse volunteer or different volunteer to someone who comes from that traditional base? Quite a few responses. The lady waving her arm down the back. We'll run the mic down to you.
How are you? I just would like to say that, and I don't know, I'm happy to be alone in this room, but I'm a bit uncomfortable with this value scale that we're putting on volunteering. A better volunteer or a worse volunteer seems to be a bit off the mark of what the point is. The idea is to find a job that is valuable and suitable for the volunteer. The volunteer takes value from, and whatever brought the person to volunteering, that they find it in a way that is beneficial for them and that also is beneficial for the organization. So if you can hit that mark, then whatever it is they're doing will probably be done more completely or more happily or more fully because they're finding value in it, and you or the organization is also finding value in it. If you have someone who is not doing that, then it's maybe not a good fit. Just like someone who's in a paid role and isn't perhaps performing to a certain level, maybe that's because the job it's just not fitting correctly. So I would just like to, just to say that I personally, if we get to better or worse, we need to step behind that and say, it's not that someone is doing a good job or a bad job, but is it a good volunteering position? Are they happy there? And if not, then look for some other opportunity. It's about, there is a place for everyone to volunteer and to find value in it. You just have to find that good fit. And I think that's the challenge that we face, is how do we create opportunities for a broad range of people when we're looking at the programs that we have. So.
Melissa?
Thanks so much. Hi, everybody. I'm Melissa Gibson. Thank you so much to the panel already. It's already been really interesting, as has this conference. And I think there's a couple of things that I've really picked up from this conference that goes to that question, Mitch. And I guess I was hearing the question a little bit more in terms of, can they be successful volunteers? Can they actually have a good experience themselves and also contribute? And there's a couple of things that really stick out for me from the conference so far. The guy from the Western Sydney Football Club, who's knocked everybody out of their socks, saying, if we don't see ourselves in your organisation, we don't want to come to your organisation. And I think that there's a lot for Red Cross to think about there, because we say we're the power of humanity. But indeed, I think lots of us have talked over the last few days about the fact that a lot of us are the power of humanity. If you live in a capital city, you're pretty educated and advantaged, and you can fit into an organisational structure really well. So I think our organisation, if we really, I'll be quick, but one of the other issues for me since I came here is that we know about the benefits of voluntary service. Everybody that volunteers gets something for themselves as well as giving to somebody else. And one of my bugbears is, if we're not supporting people that we provide services to because of disadvantage, to move up and not move up, but to move into a voluntary role after receiving the support, then we're actually widening the gap of advantage, because we're drawing in fabulous university students and very well-educated and well-abled people to come and help us. But we're losing the lived experience of people that we serve, and losing the opportunity to bring them up a little bit in terms of advantage by access to training or the fantastic things that you're doing in your graduate program, and we've got a lot to learn from you. So I'm ranting a little bit, but it's really a question that's touched our heart. I spent a couple of days, as did Cassie, with a number of young people in the room just before this conference, and I think there's a genuine interest in engaging young people from regional areas, not ones that can just whiz in a cab for, take 5 minutes to get to the head office. Young people from very diverse backgrounds, and not diverse backgrounds who have already really made it, but young people who find their way because somebody was volunteering and gave them the experience of, you can do this too. So I think Red Cross has a big challenge to acknowledge that, and don't get me wrong, lots of people do, but I think we also need to look at the resources to do that, because the very worst thing we could do is say to young people who haven't had the advantages of other young people, come volunteer with us, and not supported other volunteers, other members or other staff with the time that's required to introduce those young people to the opportunities. So nobody expects someone who's never read something in Mandarin to read an instruction manual in Mandarin, for example, and yet we often, I think, not just Red Cross, expect young volunteers to come in and just fit right into a system that doesn't reflect their lived experience. So thanks a lot for giving me the mic, Mitch. It's something that I obviously care about a lot.
This seems to be generating a good amount of discussion. We'll just take one final response down the back there.
I just want to say that I am a volunteer in South Australia for the Youth Consultants Working Group, and I actually have, not from uni, I've actually been homeless, and everything, and I was actually approached by Red Cross at a homeless day. I was doing my own thing and they just came up to me, and I didn't know what I was volunteering for. I just signed a thing, but and I was like, yeah, all right, whatever. But I believe that it doesn't matter. We're all people, and just because I haven't been to uni, and just because, I was homeless only 2 months ago, doesn't change who I am or why I come here. So I don't really like how it feels. It does feel very excluded. I do feel sometimes excluded in Red Cross, and I'm not bagging Red Cross in any way. But just because I haven't been there or I haven't studied like law at uni or anything, sometimes I do feel afraid to go. And then when they ask me like, oh, so where are you from? Like, where have you studied? I'm like, well, actually, I was just living in a youth shelter like for 8 months of my life, but you know, I'm here now. And they just look at me a bit differently. And I think that really needs to change, because that deters people and that deters me. And sometimes I don't want to go because I feel like maybe I am just seen as a homeless girl that's uneducated with bright red hair and I'm a bit crazy, but that's okay. I just want to help. But but I believe that I bring a lot of insight in, and that's why obviously I'm here, and I got the privilege to be here as well, because, you know, I was living in a youth shelter and I've only been volunteering for like maybe just 6 months, and I get to like come here and it's great, and I'm learning more and more like every day that I've been here, and it's only 2 days, but it's expanded my mind. But the more that I've been here and listening to you guys, I feel like, yeah, you guys really need to change your perception of like, I'm not better or worse than any of you just because you've been to uni. Or, you know, you're in year 12, that's great. I'm 22, so I'm not that much older than you or whatever. But yeah, I just want to say that I think I'm just as great as you are.
Thank you very much to all the audience participants there. Thank you very much in particular for your honesty. And I think that's the point. It does come down to that. There is a lot of unhelpful language that is used in discussions about this sort of thing. And we do need to move away from judging people or comparing people in this space. I'm in complete agreement with that. And I think it's helpful to remember that Australian Red Cross was actually founded mostly by people that didn't attend university. It was started by a bunch of young women in Melbourne who just wanted to help out when the First World War started and felt that they needed to do something to help other people. I think it's really important to remember that. So we'll now move on to the next section, which is talking about some of the challenges with youth volunteering. So now I'd like to put it to the panel. What, in your opinion and your experience, what do you think is the biggest challenge facing youth volunteering? I know that's a really vague question, but that's deliberate. I want you to be able to think broadly about this. What's your bugbear? What keeps you awake at night, if it does, about volunteering? So perhaps we'll start with Nada. You start over that way? All right. Start with Sean.
I don't know why I keep on checking that. Wait, so what was the question? What's the biggest issues with...
What do you see as the biggest challenge facing youth volunteering as a concept?
It's obviously... I think the two biggest starting points are exposure and engagement. So one, if you think about exposure, it's how do people know about the different opportunities that are available to them? What are the sort of mediums that you're discussing these opportunities for them? And how you sort of then engaging them initially and sort of having that sort of initial conversation, but then keeping them engaged. Oh, you can't hear me? Sorry. Do I have to repeat it or are we sweet? No. Okay, cool. Oh, okay, sorry. But I think, fundamentally it's about engaging them in a way that they can actually do something with their skills, no matter what their background is or whatever. And so I guess it may be to refer back to that previous... Well, that just died. Hey, so it wasn't me. The microphone goes in and out. To go back to the previous idea about, try to engage people outside that sort of white middle class area. And I think that that's the situation, is that we're dealing in a world that there's complex situations going on, and we need a diversity of minds to really try and address that. We need a diversity of skills. And so I think a big thing for us at YGAP is trying to work out, well, how do we help you to help use your skill in a way that's going to help others? And it's as simple as that.
Linh, do you have a response to that question?
Sure. I worry about the microphone quite a lot now. That's what keeps me up at night sometimes. that and falling off stages. So I guess I already alluded a little bit to what my answer is. Having, I guess, worked in that volunteering space, both as a volunteer but also professionally, there's, conceptual problems around engagement across the whole age spectrum. The thing that I've seen the most that happen to affect young people is, I guess, and that's probably the reason why we're all on this panel today specifically talking about youth volunteering, is that there has been a general increase across, especially in Australia, with young people volunteering either at places like the Red Cross, ACF, or at places like YGAP or Oak Tree, places that are completely run by volunteers, is that I think there's been this mass generalisation that young people love giving up their time for free and they're happy to always do it for free. And I think that's crazy. I've been lucky enough to be, I guess, paid to do the work that I really want to do, and that came from my volunteering. But I see so many young people, particularly actually university graduates who have spent thousands of dollars on their degrees, but they can't get a job anywhere. So they end up volunteering full time for 1 to 5 years at any point in time, just trying to look for employment. And I think that that's something that, and I speak about this, I guess, being particularly critical of big institutional organisations have become a little bit reliant on and a little bit exploitative of, in the sense of, great, there's going to be, 5,000 arts graduates from the University of Melbourne at the end of this year. At least half of them aren't going to get jobs, and at least half of them are going to want to work for us. Why create an employment opportunity for them when we know that we can just utilise them as volunteers and have that not cost us at all? And to be fair, no organisation does that, but every organisation does contribute to that, especially in the non-profit sector. So it's a really unfortunate conundrum of, I think people will always want to volunteer. Young people will always want to keep volunteering even after they've sought employment. But it's really unfortunate that people are volunteering sometimes simply because they have nothing else that they can also do.
Nada?
Sorry for before. I guess for me, thinking about it, and I speak on behalf of AIM and as well as YMCA, I volunteer for them for quite a bit, but just the idea of moving up in the organisation or moving up that little bit more, so just not going from a volunteer level but also learning that managerial stuff by presenting or facilitating a camp, facilitation skills by facilitating a camp and that kind of stuff. So I think what keeps me up, especially within AIM, is I work with 150 young people, and how do I give them 150 chances to step up that little bit extra and give them more skills and opportunities to further themselves? Because I know I was very lucky in that I was a mentee, and then I moved into a mentor, and then I fell homeless too, and didn't have anywhere to go, and I fell away from study. But then I had someone pushing me and pulling me into a direction that I had an opportunity to step up into, and that made me be a facilitator within the organisation, then a program manager. So I think in saying that, I've had the opportunity to do that in a number of different cases this year, and one alone is I had the opportunity to work with 32 young Indigenous Year 12 students only in the Western Met region, and having them get the opportunity only on Thursday to come in and become a mentor to those in Year 7 and 8, it blew me away to see them have the opportunity to not only give back, but to see what it's like on the other side and learn those skills of talking and facilitating with other young Indigenous people as well as other young people, and then facilitating and understanding how to interact with university students as well as universities, as well as school principals and school teachers who are there. So they're gaining the skills that they need to kind of keep going. So how do they gain skills to further themselves?
Thank you. Lara?
I guess probably going back to the question, the problems I see with youth volunteering is, I'd like to, for Sean said, engagement is a really big thing. I mean, what is appealing to young people? Giving up your time, it's to a lot of people it's not. And also diversity, going back to the previous question, and I'd like to focus a bit on people who are isolated, whether it's from a rural background or you've been living on the streets. It's hard to get into things when you're isolated and there's no specific engagement going on to those communities. And I mean, speaking from a community that was quite isolated, there are people there that want to do it. They just don't want to have to travel 5 hours to get to something that is only going to be around for 2 hours. I mean, it's about that engagement and that bringing people from diverse backgrounds in. and giving them something to do that's worth their time. And I think that's a big problem. I mean, we can sit here and talk all we like, but it's really about engaging people into doing things and putting up, putting their words into actions. I guess that's probably one of the biggest problems I find, is that you have to target people from different backgrounds, you have to engage them, and they have to be able to physically do things to be able to be really and truly, to be able to feel like they're volunteering. So, yeah.
I think that's very true. And for me, one of my biggest issues, one of the biggest challenges I see is some of the bureaucracy surrounding a lot of organisations that utilise volunteers. Because as we just discussed before, a volunteer doesn't need to be any particular type of person, really. It's just about making sure that they can actually reach that opportunity, and a lot of the times that isn't the case. With quite a few organisations that I volunteered with, not just Red Cross, but including Red Cross, even just to get into the organisation, you may be really interested in it, but just to get in, sometimes there can be mountains of paperwork that's really confusing, no matter what your background is, and pointless a lot of the time. And even, for instance, on the youth committee that I currently serve on, the application process for that was like a job interview, which I don't think it should be.
Can I add something to
Yep.
that? My controversial point. So I completely agree that sometimes it feels like it's so much effort to find these volunteering opportunities as a volunteer. But as someone that just stopped running a volunteer program, and to give you an indicator of size, we had about 5,000 volunteers at any point in time, and that sort of excluded our members that were involved through branches and things like that as well. We were inundated. The amount of emails, calls, random people that would just drop into the office to come see me and ask for a volunteer position, it would have been impossible to service and cater for absolutely everybody. And I think, I don't remember who it was in the audience before, talking about finding the right role, not just for the volunteer, but also for the organisation. Because even if you can get through the door, but the role isn't perfect, you're going to end up having a terrible time at the end. So there is, I think, something that needs to be done, but I'm not entirely sure making the process easier is what the answer actually is at all, unfortunately. Sorry, I'm mentally scarred from just a lot of different experiences. Yeah.
Okay. What do you think the solution to that is then? I know that's a huge
Yeah.
question, but do you have any ideas?
I sort of tried to solve it when I was at ACF, and varying levels of success. When I started, we had about 50 volunteers, so to be able to scale that up to 5,000 was pretty crazy. And obviously, those 5,000 people weren't coming into our Carlton office, because that, again, would have been crazy. And I could not have afforded lunch for everyone, so what I was just saying before about diversity would not have helped. One of the organisations that I guess I tried to model a lot of my work on is the biggest teenage-based volunteering organisation called Do Something. They're based in the US, so to be fair, they do a lot of corporate partnerships, but they sort of have 3 core principles. One is that volunteering shouldn't cost money. It shouldn't require, in the sense that you shouldn't have to travel, and you can do it from wherever. And the third was you shouldn't need to have an adult either, so you shouldn't need to have permission. And I guess that really goes back to this idea of community organising as well, and that's what we've tried to shift our volunteers into. Sorry, this microphone is weird. Yeah, Sean can hear me, so that's great. And what community organising shifts it from is that it's no longer about the roles and positions that you can play for an organisation. It's no longer about how you have to go into the office and be there from 9 to 5 as if it was a day job. It's actually, here's what we're doing as an organisation. Here's how we can support you, how we can upskill you and provide you with that training that Nada was talking about. And here's how you can go do that in your own community. And here are the people that are in your community that might also want to work with you on that as well. So I guess it was really about how do you create distributed volunteering? How do you not have it be centralised? How do you not have to have people come to you? But how can organisations, and to be fair, I say this from an organisational standpoint, how do you as an organisation go out to where people already are and go out to the communities that you're hoping to serve and work from within that community, as opposed to, hey, come into my office, it's in Carlton, it's really pretty. And I think that was one of the reasons why we were able to scale our program, and one of the ways that you can start to resolve that problem. But, by doing that, we opened up a whole bunch of other problems, so it's sort of a catch-22.
related to that question, one question I was going to ask is, what are the challenges in keeping volunteers, in retaining volunteers? But perhaps the question that should be asked before that is, how important is it to retain volunteers? I mean, sometimes people get quite enthusiastic and talk about sort of novel ways of volunteering, things like online volunteering. My question is, does something like that even exist? Like, is it important to actually try to retain on-the-ground volunteers, or can people come and go easily? Is that the new paradigm? Because traditionally people, organisations spend a lot of time and energy trying to keep the people involved. But do we really need to do that? Is that something we need to be worried about?
On my most frustrated days, I would always just be, well, whatever, there's like 500 other people lining up to do exactly the same role. But that was on my like most frustrated and when I was super blasé days. More often than not, I think the volunteer retention is important in the same way that retention of any sort of support that you have for your organisation or cause is important. But I think what's changing in the 21st century is that a lot of the ways that people can remain engaged have evolved. You don't necessarily have to be volunteering, as Sean is doing for YGAP at the moment, 20 to 25 hours every week. People come in, I guess, like waves and flows. So one of the pieces of work that I finished this year is figuring out when is best to recruit a volunteer and how best to retain them as well, and how to best also let them go. So in the event that people choose to have babies or children or move into state, how do they, sort of have some time off for 1 or 2 years, but maybe at some point they'll come back to the organisation as well, is sort of the questions that I think are happening now, is that you volunteer for life, but you're not necessarily with the one organisation or even in the one role for life is one way of answering that, yeah.
Does anyone else on the panel have a response to that question?
Yeah, I'd just like to second Lynn in terms of, I think you just have to stratify what you think of as volunteers, and they'll have different sort of roles. And so we have campaigns, and so people will be on board for a campaign, so that means they might be there for 2 or 3 months. You have people like me that are there all the time, and they try to get rid of me, but it won't happen. And then you have people that might just be there for a day or something like that. So like sometimes, and we do it relatively rarely because it's hard to sort of really get the most out of it, but for both the volunteer and for the organisation, but like, about a month ago, we had a bunch of EY staff, like 30 staff, come in, and we only had them come in for 1 day, and that's because they obviously had 1 day to give away. But we tried to make it in such a way that they were actually giving something, so they weren't just, to be harsh, like putting stuff in envelopes or something like that. We split them up into 4 different groups, and we did strategy sessions trying to work on different campaigns and stuff like that. And so they got to use their skills that they use day to day, but for a good purpose. So I think it's just about stratifying what you mean by volunteer.
Yeah, I think, I guess, so I get to work in a space called, like, in AIM, but I get to volunteer in a space with the YMCA. So I think I see it 2 different kind of ways. And for us, our volunteers are predominantly university students within AIM, but when I work with the YMCA or volunteer with the YMCA, it's a number of different people from a number of different walks of life, which is incredible. And so when I'm working with AIM, it's great to see the diversity within the cohort of university students and what they deliver and what they kind of put out. But for us, our programs run 6 or 7 days initially of the year, so they have to kind of commit to those days, and it's like a 4 or 5 hour day, so it's not even much. But then we find that a lot of the time our volunteers can't even comprehend or commit to that kind of statement, and I guess we put all the dates at the start of the year and it's fantastic, but then obviously you get to the middle of the year and they kind of drop off. And for us, as being culturally appropriate, we find and really emphasise the importance of retaining our volunteers so that our kids feel more comfortable and our kids can open up more, especially in the role of mentoring and like a mentee and a mentor. That connection can be built over time, and that trust isn't kind of just disconnected and connected again continuously. But then we work with YMCA where they're like volunteers are incredible and they're continually coming back camp after camp after camp, volunteering for the camp, engaging in the camp, and then even participating in the camp, then going back as a leader. So I think, I don't know the solution, but it's like an interesting kind of mix of 2 different organisations.
Lara, you've talked a lot about coming from a community that you see as being isolated. Do you think that has any bearing on being able to keep volunteers? You mentioned that it is difficult for someone to travel 5 hours to attend a meeting that goes for 2 hours.
Yeah, I mean, to even get volunteers as a starting point, and to keep them, it's hard, especially in rural areas and areas that are not so established, low socio-economic areas. And I mean, obviously people move, people have children, people get married, people go to university on the mainland, or they move around. And it's, yeah, that concept of keeping volunteers is quite hard. And I think it's something that it's important and should be looked at. But I also think that there needs to be a continuous turnover of volunteers, because I think that if you try and keep the same group of people, then it's going to sort of like dry up and become old, and the new sort of like a high turnover of volunteers, I guess it's always giving an organisation a fresh perspective on what to do, what's the current youth, what do they want, what do they need, how do we engage with them. You know, if you keep that same area and group, and you just sort of get the same middle line of stream of volunteering and people and things you would like to do. Whereas if you keep, you know, having that overturn, then you get these new people come in and see things and do things, and then they go out and tell their friends who want to come and do it as well, and then they might leave. And so it's kind of like a chain effect, really, is that if you keep having more and more people come in, and even if they come in through your doors one day and then out the next, they've still given you something, and you've probably given them something. So, yeah.
One of the really lame things I did at ACF, despite not being a numbers person at all, was I did figure out what the return on investment was for our organisation into volunteers, which touched specifically on this retention point of how much money does it cost for us to acquire. Sorry, I'm using like really management consulting terms. But how much money did it cost for us to bring on a volunteer, to advertise for the role, to recruit them, to put them through some sort of application process, to give them a proper induction, to make sure that they knew what was going on, to give them the training that was necessary? How long did we need for them to be volunteering with us for that to make sense for us, an organisation that, you know, still, as much as I mock them, still is a non-profit and still does rely on the support of other donors, before that person moved on to either another role at another organisation or just on in their lives as well. And I think when we figure that out, people suddenly in the office started to not look at volunteers as, oh, they're just like free labour, but actually this is an investment that we're literally making hundreds of dollars of an investment into this one person in. This is why it makes sense for staff to, you know, treat this volunteer as they would any other staff member as well, and do that retention thing. And I think it made the volunteer feel more valued as well at the end of the day, and it helped them feel like they had ownership. Obviously, I never told them how much they were sort of worth to the organisation or costing us, but just in the volunteers knowing that we had done that due diligence and had put that thought process in, made them more likely to want to either stay with us or at some point come back. And it's funny, just what you were saying before, some of my favourite memories at ACF were definitely working with the people that had been volunteering on and off in some capacity for like the last 40 years. But it's about having that balance of new people and also old people too.
Just as a quick follow-on from Lynn, some of you who are Melbourne-based, I guess, might be familiar with Feast of Merit, which is a restaurant in Richmond that YGAP owns. So that's a plug.
Awesome restaurant, by the way.
But it wasn't our first foray into, I guess, the hospitality area. So about in 2010, YGAP opened Kinfolk, which is on the corner of Spencer and Burke. What's interesting about that, I guess, is looking at the financials at the end of the first year. Stay with me, we'll get interesting. Was that this actually made it now? Oh no. Was that the actual cost of wages was really, and so Kinfolk is, I think it was about 85% volunteer staff at the time, and so you had a couple of people, like you had a chef and a couple of people, but mostly it was volunteers. But the actual cost for wages was really similar to a normal sort of hospitality venue, because you were spending so much time training up these volunteers that might come in twice in 3 months sort of thing, and you're just spending all your time training these people. So I guess it's really important not to think of as a volunteer, as I guess Linh was implying, as a free capital. It's actually going to cost your organisation, so it's about trying to make the most of that for both you and them. That's
a really good point. As we've discussed, there are a lot of challenges in the youth volunteering space, and it'd be great to talk more about them, but unfortunately we only have about 15 minutes left, so we might move on to the last part, which is talking about what lies ahead. So this is about the future of youth volunteering. So we can now talk about perhaps some of the solutions to some of the challenges that have been raised, but also some of the particular issues or particular prominent things that are raised, like social media, that kind of thing, and the role they actually play or should play in volunteering. So to start with, I'll go to that question, which is there's a lot of talk about social media nowadays in every area of society, and the potential beneficial impact it can have on engaging with people as volunteers. Does the reality match the hype there? What are people's experience, Nada?
Hello? Yeah, good. So I guess when I look at kind of social media, I really struggle with social media because I did not get a computer until I was like first or second year uni. And so I like really struggle with the idea of social media kind of attracting any attention within the young people and drawing them near. But I guess I found that a very different state working with AIM. They have obviously a Facebook page, and it kind of keeps going viral and viral and viral, especially when we have campaigns like the other election or campaigns like AIM's Got Game. And so I guess with that being said, it's kind of a lot of our university students, we ask them continuously when we have an interview with them, like, how did you hear about AIM? And most of them say, like, oh, through your Instagram page, or through your social media page, or through Facebook, oh, you posted something on Facebook and I really liked it, so I decided to apply. So I think in saying that social media, especially with our kind of generation drawing near, is really addicted to social media. Like, I'm sure everyone's on Facebook. Like, hands up who has Facebook here? Yeah, like we all have Facebook. Everyone's connected in social media in some way or form. So getting the message out there, getting everything connected is kind of, it's easier that way. So I think, yeah, it's worked in our instances, and something that kind of continually works, and something that we retain our mentors through is through social media, so that we get connected. We put events on the social media pages. We get them to come to events through that page. So like, yeah, it's working.
What are other people's experience with social media?
Sure. I think it's really funny because social media has like now been around for about 10 years, and I love that, like, and this isn't making fun of your question, but I think just in general, that still always baffles me, that we still speak about social media like it's this new thing. I think for me, social media has gotten to that point where I do lump it in with what broadcast media is and traditional media as well. Yes, it's still like a really different form and way of engaging with people, but it still is that very sort of soft touch. You sort of see something on your Instagram feed, you sort of see something on Facebook. Maybe if you see it 10 times because 10 of your friends posted about it, it keeps coming back to you and you're like, oh, right, brand name, this is terrible, brand name recognition, oh, that organisation again, maybe I should find out more. So that's how I've largely used social media, is that it's probably not the be-all, end-all, but it's certainly, if we wanted to reach the most amount of people without having to spend $500,000 on an ad in The Age or in, you know, like mainstream television ads, social media is the way to go, and that's just sort of the first step. How do you take social media and how do you transition that onto people actually visiting your website, people doing something as simple as signing a petition? How do you go from signing a petition to maybe donating to then actually volunteering your time to actually going out in your community and doing something? The technical lame term for that is a ladder of engagement. So how do you use that sort of biggest funnel of, we can reach 20 million Australians via social media or broadcast media. How do we then get 10 million of those people to go on our website? How do we get 5 million to do this, 2 million, et cetera, et cetera? So I think it's all about, I don't know why I'm using so many of these management terms today. It's about creating conversion. I'm going to pass on the microphone.
Oh, I agree with most of what you said, so, but I won't use any buzzwords. I think that, you know, social media is great in terms of what Nada was saying, in terms of breadth. So you've got a much bigger audience and you're able to get out a message to them. But I think that it's much like traditional media. I think it's used, by lots of not-for-profits, much like traditional media in terms of one-way communication. You're just telling them what is there, what this is this, or whatever. I think that the real benefit you can potentially gain from social media is the fact that it becomes two-way communication, and you can turn that from exposing information to engaging with them, to empowering them, and that's about sort of converting, I guess, converting into actually something more meaningful. And so that's why I think that, I guess that's the sort of underutilized thing that I think a lot of the more traditional non-for-profits could really start looking into a bit more.
Great, thanks. Lara?
I guess social media is a big topic, especially I found that in the summit it's been mentioned a lot, especially with youth. And I think that it's a really important topic because I think it is the right way to go about reaching youth and putting our names out there. Because, I mean, let's face it, not really a lot of us pick up a newspaper and read it for leisure. We go on Facebook. So I think, like, the experience with that is that it's very dependent on how well you market, what you're trying to get out there and what age group you're trying to target. And I think sometimes that can be like, I don't really know where I'm going with this a little bit, but like a little bit negative because I've often found that I've clicked on links to organisations and things and you sort of watch their videos and it's kind of like they've got this big and great thing going on and it's almost like, wow, it's almost too good. I don't need to do anything. It's an opinion thing, I guess, as well, about how you feel about it. But sometimes I think that sometimes social media can affect you negatively if you look too deeply into things and if you, especially in like, an overload of information as well. I think there's a very fine line between giving the correct amount of information to a young person who really doesn't want to spend 20 minutes reading through a post. They want to just be able to click on it and read it in a second because our whole lives pretty much revolve around one button. And I mean, and that's the thing, like, you've got to be careful that you don't overload people with information or give them too little. It's that very fine line between the great social media marketing side and being a negative influence in someone's news feed. I mean, I don't know how many Facebook pages I've liked and then they've just literally filled my news feed up with just stuff I don't really care about. And that sounds awful, but I don't have time to spend 20 minutes scrolling through my newsfeed, going through the things that they're trying to put on there. It's there's a fine line, and I think it's important that it's also run by youth as well, the social media, because they know what youth want to see. I think we know what youth would like to see on a Facebook page. We're the ones that have the power to directly, get their attention. If you're an older guy sitting behind or an older woman sitting behind a computer screen updating a status, it's kind of contradicts the whole point of engaging youth. So, yeah, I guess it's, yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point. You do, unfortunately, come across instances where it's obviously been written by someone who doesn't really work in that space, and it can actually come across as quite patronising sometimes, the way they market things. So I agree, it's very important to actually have young people talking to other young people. I asked you before what you thought the greatest challenge was for youth volunteering. I'm going to turn that around. What do you think is the biggest opportunity? What's the biggest untapped potential with young volunteers? Sean?
Oh wait, I was first last time. Surely it's not.
I guess my negative remark to what I said before in terms of providing that opportunity, I guess, is also a positive thing. Like, it is something that can be done for us. So I think in saying that what I said before about, I want young people to kind of step up and continually step up in a role that can already be done, and so that's amazing opportunity for them to do that. And it's easily done and easily said as well, but obviously putting it into action and making it happen is a different story. And I guess something that I share with my kids is a story and an awesome opportunity and a way for us to step up. And I always envision young people, I guess, or I say in terms of culture, so I say like us young Indigenous people stepping towards a racing track and seeing those who've come before us continually running on that racing track. And as I'm walking near to kind of run my race, I always see those older kind of running, and some of them tripping over, some of them falling, some of them getting back up and smiling and laughing and running towards me. But I also turn to the left of me and see an audience full of amazing people who've given me opportunities, who've done so many incredible things. And so as I'm approaching that racing track, I see the baton that they're holding in their hand, full of those stories, and obviously within that baton, an opportunity that they want to give to us. And so recognizing that as something that keeps me going. And I guess the biggest part of that is giving the young people, I guess, stepping onto that racing track, the opportunity to hand over that baton, and for the those older to kind of join the crowd that's cheering us on already. So I guess in saying that, we're going to learn our race, and we're going to learn how to trip and how to get back up every time. But yeah, just providing that opportunity and that space to do so is really important.
Linh?
I think what I'm most excited about in terms of opportunities, especially in the youth volunteering space, is that young people are super impatient, and maybe that's because our lives revolve around social media and everything being one button. But it means that most young people aren't going to wait anymore. If they apply to volunteer for an organisation and that organisation says no for whatever reason, they're going to go to another organisation, or they're going to go out straight into their community and do something. And this is why we have really cool youth-led initiatives from YGAP to Oak Tree to lots of other examples too, is that young people aren't just going to wait for not just governments and big corporations to change anymore, but also they're not going to wait for the traditional non-profit institutionalised world to change either. They're just going to go out there and do it. And I think that sure, that presents a whole bunch of difficulties, but what the internet and what social media actually has done is that it's made all of those opportunities so much easier to access. And still, yes, it's a barrier if you don't have a computer, but if you do, it's at your hands, like what it is you choose to go out there and do, and that's really exciting and that's really cool.
You want to go first? I'll go last.
I've just completely lost my train of thought. You mucked me up, Sean. Now I don't know what I'm doing.
Do you want me to go and then you can go last?
No, you should give it. No, yeah, you need to go. I'm sorry.
So I'll piggyback off the previous two answers. I think that the key is that the barriers to entry in volunteering are less than they've ever been before. And there's greater opportunity than there has been to make a sort of tangible difference. And I think, and I could be wrong about this, it's just maybe an opinion sort of thing, but I feel like with each generation that goes on, we seem to be more and more aware of how what we're doing impacts the lives of everybody around us. And I think it's probably because, 50 years ago, it would be harder to know what was going on the other side of the world because of technology and all that sort of stuff. And so maybe for us, we just are more aware of stuff that's going on, and so therefore we want to try and help more. But for me, I feel like, and I'm saying the generation after me again, it's just going to continue to want and strive to sort of be part of the change. And so the combination of wanting to be part of the change and the barriers to entry going down just seems to me that it's going to be a really good place.
Sorry, sort of backing onto what you've just said. I think as well, volunteering as well as being a movement of youth across the world, it's also about a personal journey as well, and also character building. And I think if you can pass those things down to generations below you, then we have pretty great opportunity for generations under us to be great and to change things and to realise that the world is full of a lot of problems, and that they might have the opportunity to recognise them and fix them through their own skills and their own dreams and hopes and aspirations, as well as working in a group and together. And I think that's probably like the flip side of what challenges do we face, is that volunteering, well, in a positive light, it gives you that I'm sorry. It gives you the gratification, self-satisfaction, and gives you the ability to pass your knowledge on to other people around you and below you, so that it can continue and it can grow into something that maybe one day, the world will be a better place because of the platform that, I think as well, especially our generation sets, especially with social media, to reach out to absolutely everybody that you possibly can to try and get them engaged. So.
We're almost out of time, so I just have one final question, which I'd like to open to the audience, in particular some of the members of the audience who are from a different age bracket. And my question is, we've talked a lot today about youth volunteering as a concept. I just want to put the question out there: are young volunteers really that different to other age groups of volunteers? Does anyone have any strong opinions about that? Tony?
So, Tony Aslett from Victoria. I think the first thing I'm going to say is I don't think there are any different values. I think some of the things that people have said on the stage today and in the audience actually demonstrate that there's so much in common. It's just the mechanism in which perhaps young people engage that's different. And one of the things that's been going through my mind as you've all been talking is, you know, thinking about 100 years ago, Red Cross, there was probably Red Cross and the church to join. And now people are connected throughout the world and don't, you know, there isn't, if you like, there's a lot of competition for a young person to be engaged with an organisation. And I'm just trying to get my head around whether that matters or whether actually just any form of engagement is a good thing, and rather than seeing it as competition, seeing it as a way to contribute to the development of all sorts of opportunities within the world. Because if we're trying to compete with each other, then I think we've got a problem. Everyone has a different way of contributing. So, I'm just trying to get my head around that problem, I suppose, because people can't just volunteer in Australia now. They can be volunteering with an organisation on the other part of the world. And where does Red Cross fit in to all of that, or indeed any of the organisations? So what makes us attractive, I suppose, for a young person to want to come and volunteer with us? So I think it's a big challenge, and I'm not sure. I think I'm more confused than when I came in because of that. So that's a bit of a statement, but yeah.
Just to add on that, I think one of the big differences between young people and maybe older generations, to generalise, is that young people have less brand loyalty, organisational loyalty. I mean, Nada mentioned herself that she works at AIM but also volunteers at the YMCA as well. Most volunteers, that's great. Most volunteers don't just volunteer at one organisation. They've got a couple of other different things going on as well. And it's one of those, the question really then is on, it's fine that there's lots of opportunities out there. How do you make it that your organisation or your cause or whatever is the one that people want to give the most time to, is where that question is. But that's only probably the biggest difference.
I think we probably have time for one more response. This lady here in the red.
Hi, my name is Arithi Krishnan. I'm the program manager for the International Volunteer Program at Red Cross. And we've got an opportunity now where we're looking to engage young people in our international volunteering program. I've been in development for a really long time and lived and worked in quite a few different communities. And traditionally, international youth volunteering programs have not had a particularly good reputation because of the behaviour of young volunteers whilst overseas, the lack of engagement in communities, etc. So whilst we're now in a really exciting space, and I'm really excited about this, about engaging with young people, and I'm coming with a blank slate and saying, I need to learn about this, tell me. My concern being a development practitioner is really, our focus is the work that we do when we partner with our communities overseas. We have to be respectful that the objectives of social change that we're trying to contribute towards is our primary focus. How do we balance that between identifying as diverse a group of young volunteers to partner with us and their development, their growth and their needs, as well as balancing the cultural, technical, resilience, all the other development, the requirements from a development perspective that we need to be able to work respectfully and with integrity with our community. So I don't have any answers, but it's something that I suppose keeps me awake at night. So I'd be keen to understand from your perspective if you have any thoughts on that.
we might actually need to leave it there. It's now 2:45, unfortunately. But I think that is a good place to leave it. I kind of agree with you, Tony. It is... Do we have afternoon tea? Yeah. Okay. Well, if people would like to leave, feel free. I don't want to unnecessarily keep you here, but if you would like to respond to that.
I think that you should just treat it like any... Oh, she's not even listening. I just think that, and I think it goes to Lynn's point about, you know, you have 5,000 volunteers, you need to have some sort of mechanism to sort through them. I think you treat it like any other job interview, right? Like if you all want to get the right people for that organisation, they have to go through some sort of process. Maybe you don't want it to be, they have to write 7 selection criteria and all that sort of stuff. Maybe you try to make it a little bit more dynamic and more exciting. Like I know that Teach for Australia do a really great recruitment program for the stuff that they do. Maybe you could talk to them about, well, how do you work out who are the best people for this sort of trip? But yeah, I think that you have to actually treat it like it's a serious brand reputation risk for you guys. Make sure you get the right people on board.
Okay, I think we will leave it there. Just going to finish by saying I very much agree with Tony Aslett's point. This is quite a large and confusing topic, and there have been a lot of things discussed today, and it can be easy to feel overwhelmed by it or feel like there's not always a consensus on these things. But I think that's actually a good thing. There are a lot of issues in this space. The way they're going to be addressed is just by talking about it. And as we've seen today, there is a lot of diversity in young volunteers. And there's a lot of diversity in opinions about youth volunteering. And anyone who attended the collective impact talk yesterday, I think the point was made very well there that the way forward is firstly to actually talk about these things and then find a common agenda. It's okay for people to hold different opinions. It really is. Where we go to from here is sorting through all that and finding how we can move forward, finding what we actually do agree on. But the only way to do that is by talking about it. So on that note, I'd like to ask you all to thank Sean, Lynn, Lara and Nada for coming along today and sharing your experiences.
Can I say something? I just wanted to say I think everyone, we should give Mitch a really big round of applause as well. It's been great. Thanks, Mitch.